What is going on, chess YouTube? So in today's video, we're looking at one of Magnus Carlsen's very best games from day number 1 of the 2024 Champions Chess Tour Finals, which is happening right now. This game is Magnus versus Ian Nepomniachtchi from the 2024 Champions Chess Tour Finals. And here we go. In the game, Magnus is playing as white. He opens 1e4, best by test, and Ian does go 1e5. Now we have knight f3, and Ian does go for his favorite Petroff Defense with the move knight to f6. Now, Ian is one of the only top players who plays this as his main defense against 1e4, and it does have a very drawish reputation, but Magnus here is going to find a way to mix things up. All right, he starts knight takes e5, then d6, knight f3, and knight takes e4. So far, this is very standard stuff, and now the main line for white starts d4, then bishop d3, and then short castles. However, instead, in this game, he does go for an older line, but still a very dangerous one. That is the move knight to c3. The point being, you are challenging that knight on e4 immediately with your own knight. Now here, black typically does trade on c3. Knight takes c3 is the move. And now, obviously, white has a choice. You can recapture with the b pawn or the d pawn. However, d takes c4, or d takes c3, sorry, is the only move played at the highest level. The point being, yes, you are capturing away from the center. That is a drawback of the move. However, the benefit of this is this bishop on c1 can now enter the game very, very fast. And white's main idea is to go bishop e3 or f4, then queen d2 and long castles. And if black does castle on the king side, white is going to be launching an attack against the black king as soon as possible. All right, now here, Ian, he has two main plans as black. The first plan, and the strongest one, is to castle king side. However, you can also go castling on the queen side. For example, knight c6, bishop e6, queen d7, and long castles is also playable. Now, in the game, Ian, he starts bishop e7, the standard move, regardless of which way you want to castle with your king. Now here, the main move for white, according to top theory, is bishop e3. That is the strongest move. Again, you just go queen d2 and long castle, and then think about ideas like, I don't know, h4, knight g5, and so on, getting your king side attack going. Now instead, here, Magnus, he does go bishop f4. Now, Magnus knows bishop e3 is a little bit stronger. His idea here, though, he's trying to throw Ian off his game and throw him a little bit of a curveball, and he does that with that move bishop f4. All right, now here, Ian, he continues, knight d7, a perfectly fine move. Now the knight, of course, has access to many different squares, e5, f6, c5, and so on. I mean, black typically wants to go knight f6 here, but there are a lot of different plans depending on how white continues. All right, now Magnus, queen d2. Now we have short castles and long castles. And now the opening phase of the game is mostly over. Again, black is perfectly solid. He has virtually no weaknesses. However, with the kings on opposite sides of the board, that does mean white is going to have decent attacking chances against the black king, and that is the benefit of this 5 knight to c3 line against the Petroff. All right, now here, Ian, the strongest move for black is going to be rook to e8. That is the most flexible move. The rook does belong on the e8 square. Perhaps in the future you can go bishop f8, and beyond that you are just staying flexible. For example, if white goes, say, bishop c4, then you can go knight b6, hitting the bishop, and instead if white goes, say, bishop d3, then knight c5 again hits the bishop. So overall, going rook e8 first before moving your knight is the more flexible move order. Now, instead of that, here, Ian, he goes knight c5 immediately jumping up with his knight and taking control of that d3 square and discouraging bishop d3 from white. However, the drawback is white doesn't have to go bishop d3. Instead, he can go anywhere else with it, say bishop c4, or instead the move played in the game, the alpha 0 move, h4, and oh boy, do I love a good alpha 0 attack. I mean, alpha 0 was the chess player, if you want to call it a chess player, that got me back interested in chess in 2017, and I've been hooked ever since, you know, playing it in my childhood, taking a break, and then alpha 0 comes along, and it's like, all right, I got to get back into the swing of things. All right, now here, Ian, he does go rook to e8. Now here, Magnus, the strongest move according to the engine is to capitalize on the placement of that alpha 0 pawn and jump up with the knight, knight g5. And of course, that knight will be just tremendously placed on g5. For example, in the future, white can go, say, bishop d3 targeting h7, or bishop c4 targeting f7, as f7 would be weak with the knight on g5 and the bishop on c4. Now, instead of knight g5, here Magnus does go bishop c4 immediately, a perfectly fine move. However, here, Ian, he has many different good responses. For example, bishop e6, f5, and g4 are all playable here. In the game, he does go bishop e6, challenging the light square bishop on c4 immediately. All right, now, here, Magnus, bishop takes e6 is the move. Then we have knight takes e6, and now, of course, that bishop on f4 is being targeted by the knight. He does have to drop it back. Bishop to e3. Now here, Jan, how does he want to proceed? He continues with the move c6, taking control of that d5 square, potentially setting up d5, and beyond that, potentially setting up a queenside attack with the moves b5, a5, b4, and so on. Of course, with white's king on the queen side and black's king on the king side, attacking with these queenside pawns is always going to be a dangerous threat. All right, now here, Magnus, again, he has many different ways to continue the attack. For example, most aggressive options include knight g5 and h5, but instead, he takes a moment to just try and lock down the queenside and the center, and he does go c4. Now, this turns out to be the strongest move in this position, and it has many different ideas behind it. Obviously, you are discouraging both b5 and d5. d5 in particular, as that would lose a pawn to c takes d5, c takes, then queen takes d5. So overall, c4, very good move. And beyond that, white also has ideas like maybe queen c3, bishop d4, and so on in the future, applying pressure on this long diagonal. All right, now here, Jan, he just retreats the bishop. Bishop f8, a perfectly fine move, a Roy Lopez-style move, very good. And now here, Magnus, he increases the pressure with the alpha 0 h-pawn, h5. Here we go. The threat, of course, is going to be h6, pummeling that alpha 0 pawn all the way into enemy territory. And if white can get that move off, literally, no matter what black does, he's going to have some sort of weakness on the king side. If you take the pawn, your king side pawns are weak. If you go g6, you have weaknesses on the dark squares. And if you do nothing, then obviously h takes g7 will weaken the dark squares as well. Now here, Jan, what does he want to do? Well, it turns out h6, blocking the alpha 0 pawn dead in its tracks, is the right way forward. But instead here, he does go a6, intending a very fast b5. Now, the problem with this move, obviously, it gives white the free hand to just push that alpha 0 pawn all the way to h6, reaching its final destination. That is what happens in the game. So, h6, the best move on the chessboard in any position. Now, again, no matter what you do, taking, going g6, or doing nothing and allowing h takes g7, no matter what, you're going to be in just a world of trouble. All right, in the game, Jan, he does go g6, permanently weakening his king side dark squares. Now, here, you may be wondering, what is the point of this alpha 0 pawn on h6? After all, black is guarding g7 with the bishop and the knight. Therefore, queen to g7 checkmate is not going to be an idea in the near future. Well, it's very simple. This pawn advance to h6 is a long-term strategic decision. This pawn will be a menace all the way late into the game, even potentially in the endgame. I mean, white is always going to have queen to g7 threats later in the game, and even in the endgame, if that pawn on h7 does fall, this pawn on h6 becomes a pass pawn, and it will be incredibly dangerous. That is the genius of Alpha Zero. It popularized this idea in many different openings, and this pawn is going to be a very, very long-term asset, even deep into the endgame, assuming it survives. All right, now, queen to c3. Setting up the potential idea of queen g7 later in the game, Jan is going to have to respect that no matter what. All right, now, queen to e7. Now, rook h to e1, swinging over the rook, and that way, over the rook, over to the e1 square, lining up with the queen on e7. All right, now, Jan, he's got to get his queenside play going. He's got to get it going fast. The strongest move here is going to be b5. Again, just charging down the board with those pawns. But instead, he plays a move that I simply cannot understand for the life of me. Maybe you guys know what Jan was thinking with this move. He actually plays the move f5, gaining space on the king side. I mean, typically, you don't want to gain space on the side of the board you are being attacked on, especially in these opposite side castling positions. I mean, this move just weakens so many squares on the king side. But again, Jan, he's a 2700 Super GM, and I'm a, 2000 amateur player, so I probably shouldn't be talking, but still, this move f5 looks so absurd to me. All right, now, king to b1 for Magnus, sliding his king over, and now queen to f7. Okay, this was the idea. He wants to go f5, then queen f7, maybe then f4, pushing the bishop back, and actually, Alpha Zero did popularize this sort of idea in one of the anti-Grunfeld lines, the 3f3 anti-Grunfeld line. There's a line in that opening where black goes 3d5, and then eventually Alpha Zero introduced the idea of like 9f4 in a very key position. Magnus Carlsen even played a game with that exact variation before. You know what? I'm going to link to that Magnus Carlsen game at the end of this video where he played the Alpha Zero novelty 9f4 in a Grunfeld position. So just stick around at the end of the video and watch that other video I'm going to link for you. But anyway, that's what this reminds me of. Now here, bishop c1, sliding the bishop out of the way of the attack of that f-pawn, going to the f4 square. And now here, Jan does go f4 anyway, gaining space. That is the right way to follow up. I mean, f5 originally may not have been the strongest move, but continuing queen f7 and f4 was the right follow-up regardless. All right, now here, Magnus, the computer finds a move that just stuns me. I don't know how Stockfish finds these ideas acceptable. This is just not classical chess principles right here. It wants to go b4. The point being, you can go bishop b2, putting pressure along diagonal, threatening queen to h8, but still, why would you push the pawn 2 squares instead of 1? I mean, that is just modern computer chess for you. Anyway, instead of b4 or b3, here Magnus did just go rook to h1. This move turns out to be a little bit dubious, and it does throw away a big portion of Magnus Carlsen's advantage here. Now, the benefit is, yes, you are defending that pawn on h6 with the rook, so that pawn cannot be taken by the bishop, but overall, this move is a little bit slow. Now here, the right way forward for Jan is simply knight to c5, intending perhaps ideas like knight e4, jumping in with the knight, pressuring the queen on c3. Instead, he does go bishop e7, and this move turns out to be a little bit dubious. Now here, Magnus, with that pawn on h6 no longer being attacked, he slides his rook over, rook h to e1, and now again we have bishop f8, both sides going back and forth. Now here, obviously, Magnus does have the option of going for the immediate draw with the move rook h1, again defending the pawn on the h6 square. But instead here, he actually goes ballistic, nuclear on the king side. He plays the move g4, and this is a madman's move. I mean, what is he doing? He's giving up that pawn on h6. He's giving black the option of ideas like f takes g3. I mean, this is a crazy move, but obviously Magnus, he's playing for a win at all costs. He says, you know what? I've got to create some sort of imbalance on the king side. I got to open up some lines, and this is the way to do it. So here, g4 is the move. Now bishop takes h6. Now the drawback of this move, obviously, when you take the bishop off this diagonal here, you do leave that pawn on d6 undefended. That does mean rook takes d6 is the move, flying in with the rook, winning that pawn. Now here, Jan, bishop g7, flying back with the bishop. So sad. The alpha 0 pawn is no longer with us. Rest in peace, alpha 0 pawn. And that means g7 is available for the bishop, where it does challenge the queen on the low diagonal on the c3 square. Now here, queen to a5 is the move, jumping up with the queen. Now the queen does have access to a lot of these dark squares on the queen side, as well as potentially the king side and the center in the future. So very interesting placement of the queen. Now here, we have knight f8 for Jan, b3 for Magnus, and now here, the rooks do come flying off. Rook takes e1, queen takes e1, and then rook to e8, centralizing the rook. And at this point here, Jan, credit to Jan, he has fought back in this game, and he has pretty much equalized against the GOAT Magnus Carlsen. I mean, you know, look at his pieces here, like his queen, his bishop, his rook. The only bad piece really is the knight, but the knight does have access to, say, d7, e6, and so on, where it will jump back into the game. And overall, Magnus, you know, his position looking a little bit shaky. The queen and the rook and the knight and the bishop aren't really synergizing that well yet. All right, now, obviously, rook e8 was played, putting pressure on the queen. The queen's got to go somewhere. So, in the game, queen d2 is the move, supporting the rook on d6. Now we have queen to e7, Jan doubling up his major pieces on the e-file. Now bishop b2, queen to e2, and now obviously Jan is offering the queen trade with this move, queen e2. Will Magnus go for it? He says, no way, Jose. We're taking that free pawn on f4. Queen takes f4, winning the pawn, but of course, in the process, giving up the defense of that pawn on f2. Now here, Jan, before taking that pawn on f2, he demonstrates his perspicacity with the very strong move, queen to f1 check, hitting the king, forcing out queen to c1 defending, and only then takes on f2. So the point of queen to f1 was the point that you force the queen to draw back, then you take on f2 on the next move. Now here, Magnus, bishop takes g7, then king takes, then we have queen to f4, flying up with the queen, and now here, Jan, so far he has played really, really well in this game. He's playing excellent defensive chess, very, very solid, very classical chess principles, but now he makes a major mistake here. The right way forward is just queen to e3, putting pressure on the queen, once again offering the queen trade, and if we do see an endgame, Jan may even have an advantage in the endgame, as it is much easier to create a pass pawn on the king side with a 2 versus 1 pawn majority versus on the queen side where it's a 4 versus 3, and beyond that, obviously, white has the double pawns on the c-file. That will make it much harder, maybe even impossible, to get a pass pawn on that side of the board. So overall, queen e3 is the right way forward. But instead here, Jan does go rook to e6, trying to simplify, but getting a little bit trigger happy. His idea is, well, if you trade rooks, then I'm doing okay. But obviously, Magnus, he is not forced to do that. Instead, he flies back with the rook, or up, whatever you want to call it, rook d8, flying to the back rank, putting pressure on the knight. And beyond that, he has the option of going rook to b8 in the future, pressuring that weak b7 pawn. Now here, Ian Nepomniachtchi, he flies back with the queen to c5, flying back, and now sure enough, rook b8, threatening rook takes b7 check. So Magnus here, despite having a relatively equal position, he has found a way to increase the pressure. Jan made one mistake, and now once again, he is applying tremendous pressure. All right, Jan, he tries to defend. Queen d7, flying back with the queen. Jan still staying very solid. His pieces are decently centralized, but of course, his king is quite vulnerable, and that knight on f8 is doing absolutely nothing in this position. All right, Magnus here, he continues to increase the pressure. g5, locking down those dark squares on the king side. Now we have c5 for Jan, a4 and a5, and now here, the key move for white is going to be rook to c8, threatening rook c7 with the pin of the queen on the king on g7. That would be an absolute disaster for Jan if Magnus got it in. Now, instead of rook c8 here, Magnus, he does go queen d2, flying back with the queen. Now we have b6, and then queen to c3 check, hitting the king. Now the king must move. King to g8 is the move. Queen d2, queen c7, pressuring that rook on b8 is the move by Jan. And now here we have rook d8, Magnus trying to stay centralized. So overall here, Magnus, his main plan is just to shark around, try to find even the smallest mistake by Jan, and then immediately punish it as the punisher that he is. All right, here Jan, he tries to defend. Queen to f7, a fine move. Now queen d5, potentially, pinning the rook to the queen on f7. Yes, the queen is defended, but there are a lot of ideas here. And here, Jan, he makes a critical mistake. He starts to choke under the pressure. The right move here is simply rook to e3, flying down with the rook, pressuring the knight with both the rook and the queen, and offering the queen trade. If you play that move, rook to e3, almost all of your problems are solved. But instead of that, he goes king to g7. And right here, Magnus, he just turns the pressure once again. Rook to b8, threatening rook b7. And here, Jan, he really chokes. Knight to d7, an absolutely fatal mistake. What is the problem with this move? Well, Magnus, he just goes rook b7 anyway. And look at this. Now the knight is officially pinned to the queen on f7. Things are getting dicey, and beyond that, simply rook takes d7 is being threatened. All right, Jan, he tries to defend. Rook e7, sliding his rook back, but now queen to d6. The threat here, believe it or not, is simply knight to e5, jumping in with the knight. Then if you take the knight with the knight, rook takes e7, and the queen is pinned to the king. Instead, after knight to e5, if you go say rook takes e5, then rook takes d7, and again, the queen is pinned to the king. What is Jan going to do? There's almost nothing you can do. He tries to defend king to f8, the point being now the king does support the rook, and that relieves a little bit of the pressure after, say, knight e5. But here, Magnus, the GOAT, he just plays one final move to seal the deal, to win the game in this incredible game from the 2024 Champions Chess Tour Finals. He just goes rook takes d7, winning the knight. And here's the issue. The rook on e7 is pinned to the king. You can't go rook takes d7, as then the king would be under check. That is not a legal move, and there's just nothing he can do. Jan, if he goes queen takes f3, then queen takes e7, followed by, say, king g8, then queen g7 will be checkmate. And that means Jan here, he's just down a piece. Knight e5 is coming. He's out of luck, out of time, nowhere to go, down material. And for that reason, he simply resigns to Magnus Carlsen in this incredible game, again, from the 2024 Champions Chess Tour Finals. All right, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash that like button and check out this video right here, where, as promised, I show you the game where Magnus Carlsen steals AlphaZero's new opening novelty in the 3F3 anti-Grunfeld opening. That game was really cool. If my memory serves me correct, it was played against, I believe, Wesley So, and it was a shocker of a game. If you want to see Magnus again play AlphaZero's new opening novelty that he employed against Stockfish, check that video out, and I'll see you in the next video.